Welcome to Screams from the Center, where I hope to provide information on topics I find interesting and give my take on them. In this episode, we talk about climate change. And we bring up topics like, is climate change conspiracy true? Does green energy pollute more? And how can we switch to clean energy? Enjoy the episode and thank you for watching. I want to address the issue of climate science being a hoax, climate change being a hoax. And the reason I'm coming to this is because I argue with conservatives and they say things like, oh, scientists are doing this just for publicity and to increase their grant money. And I'm like, well, that's an interesting argument to make. And couldn't you actually just, my thought is, couldn't you just actually apply that to the scientists and lawyers and lobbyists that speak against climate science as well? I mean, I've seen graphics online that tell us things like, this is how much the conspiracy theory would have to be in order for climate scientists to be wrong and oil industry experts to be right about climate change. And I come to the idea that a lot of times people are looking for some sort of rock star, someone that they can point to in a particular science field that spotlights the idea of it. Now, most of the time this doesn't happen because in a lot of aspects of science, nobody argues against what scientists say. Nobody argues against the facts that you see out there. But every now and then, someone does. So that's why you have the rise of people like Richard Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist, and science communicator Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson. Well, they're not necessarily promoting something that most people view as being incorrect or even any kind of significant statistic. But when it comes to climate science, it's a little different. So, basically, to explore the conspiracy theory that climate science is a hoax, climate change is a hoax, you have to ask yourself which is more likely. That regional and environmental groups, community activists, spend limited operating budgets in a massive conspiracy to get 97% of peer-reviewed science articles dating as far back as the 1940s to be pro-climate change, to create a hoax specifically to ruin the economy. Because that is the basic premise that you have with conservatives saying climate change is a hoax. These scientists are getting paid by these regional and small national groups to get loaded answers and submit them in a peer-reviewed process, which is a competitive process, by the way. It sounds like peer review means that everybody's buddy-buddy. Peer review means that independent scientists not associated with the paper in question, but studied in the field, try to disprove the points of those papers. And if they can recreate the test and provide falsibility to the test, then it fails the peer review process. If they come to the same conclusions over and over again, then all they can do is pass it on as reviewed. It's a simplification of how the process actually works. But science is not as collaborative as climate hoaxers believe it is. It is actually competitive in the sense of science papers getting published. And the reason behind that is because of the mechanism in which conservatives think is happening in the science community. That in order to get grants, they have to say that climate change is real. No, in order to get big money grants, they have to prove that they have some sort of worth. Now, whether or not that is climate change is real or climate change is not real doesn't matter to a climate scientist. We have had climate scientists for decades, long before the idea of climate change was a real concept. We have peer-reviewed papers dating back to the 1940s. So this is not only a conspiracy, but a multi-generational conspiracy through the scientific fields that has culminated in over 90% of scientists and 97% of scientific peer-reviewed papers agreeing that climate change is real. On the other hand, you have oil companies. Now, an oil company is not the sum of its parts necessarily. The board of directors is on at the behest of the stockholders to make money. A corporation is designed to make money. And if the oil business is what you do to make money, then you want to perpetuate that. So it doesn't matter going back to the scientists real quick, it doesn't matter if climate change is real or not, there's still climate science to be done. So they will have jobs whether or not climate change is real. And these type of scientists only find out if it's real and what is happening. They're not there to offer necessarily solutions. They're there to find the processes by which our observable world is reacting to. So back to the oil companies, they are out there to make money. Nobody argues that, not even conservatives. So these oil companies spending obscene profits, and the most profitable companies in the world are either tech companies or oil companies. So they spend obscene amounts of their profits just to buy off people, because most climate scientists or most climate change deniers that speak out, that are the rock stars of the anti-climate movement, they're people who generally don't have degrees in the field. Now, there are some, and again, you can trace their funding back to these things, back to these oil companies, these natural gas and oil, and these lobbying groups that are basically funded by them. So these oil companies spend their money basically to bribe anyone they can, because these people aren't coming out with papers that have scientific evidence presented for other scientists to review and debate. They just come on things like Fox News and say that climate change isn't real. So they basically bribe these people just to speak, and they do this to protect their profits and limit future liability that the pollution that they're doing may cause. It's plain and simple. Now, you can believe either way, but usually, at least with the Occam's razor argument, the idea that regional and environmental groups spend limited budgets to bribe most of the world's scientists into creating a hoax that purposely ruins the economy, versus oil companies spending their massive profits bribing people to speak on TV to protect their profits. Which is the logical argument? So, that comes to the idea the conservatives don't know the names of any rock star scientist in the climate change community. This is also another characteristic that would possibly happen if this were a hoax. You would have your scientists that would be like spokesmen for that cause. Mike Huckabee, presidential candidate, he talks about religion. He is a spokesman for religion, basically. But you don't have a climate scientist coming on TV and being a rock star. They're not selling tickets to events. Now, there are environmental groups that do these kinds of advocacies, and they will do that sort of funding, and they will pay the scientists to come out and talk about papers that they've done. And that goes to the whole peer review process. Science is a competitive sport. It's not something that's all that collaborative. I mean, certainly there is collaboration, but the peer review process is not an easy thing to get through. And there's certainly, if there's any kind of corruption or hoax that's going on, it will be discovered really quickly. So that's my take when it comes to climate change denial from a scientific and conspiracy point of view. We've got other topics we can talk about as well when it comes to climate science. Thank you. So when we talk about climate change in regards to energy production, a couple of interesting things were brought up to me. First off, I had a conservative that tried to make an argument that solar panels produce more pollution than even the entire, during their life cycle than a coal power plant would from construction. This is construction to tear down of both concepts, generating the same amount of power. And quite frankly, I can't find any statistics that talk about this. Now, there are some articles that were put out by anti-climate change groups that cited the kinds of materials that needed to be mined and used in construction for solar panels. But what they failed to do is if they're going to approach this objectively rather than subjectively as I charge here, they approach this with the idea of they're going to tell you what goes into making these solar panels and how much raw materials of these different kinds of things that it takes to create a solar panel, a solar farm of a particular amount of power. And there's no real statistics on the same thing happening with a coal, nuclear, natural gas, oil power plants, or any other type of energy power plants. The only articles we see concerning this is wind and solar. So I have to ask myself, really how much raw materials go into the construction of various power plants? And now keep in mind, whereas wind and solar don't need any fuel, we have to have fuel for coal-fired power plants, for example, and nuclear. So when you're coming up with these construction pollutants, you also have to factor in the fueling process of the life cycle of a coal-powered plant and the pollution that fuel creates as well. So you have, with wind and solar, you have the mining and processing and building from raw materials to finished product. With a coal power plant, you have the mining, construction, you have the same factors to build the power plant. And then you have to continue mining efforts to get the fuel for the power plant, and then you have to consume the fuel, creating those pollutants on top of that. And this is over the entire life cycle of the power plant. And while I can't find those statistics, I am very willing to bet that the idea that solar and wind are dirtier than coal won't pan out under scrutiny, which is why those figures are not out there. So the hoaxer, the people who claim that climate science and climate change is a hoax, are presenting a one-sided argument based on no facts. I mean, certainly they have the statistics of what goes into the construction of these power sources that are considered green power sources, but they don't give you the entire truth. And what I find odd is that on the pro-climate change side, we see facts and figures that you can verify and check. And nobody's denying that there are materials used in the construction of these types of power sources that isn't harmful. Almost anything you manufacture has some sort of harmful process in it. And it all comes to what is the net gain or loss. And so far, statistically speaking, just on burning coal versus the construction of wind and solar, coal loses. Thank you. Conservatives like to argue with me when it comes to climate change on why we can't build wind and solar because it will cost too much. Well, it is true that wind and solar in the subsidized versus non-subsidized legal trickery does seem to be more expensive than coal. The idea that a lot of people, myself included, have is what's called a phased-in concept. And this is where you build any new and needed capacity from green sources, and then any replacement power distribution and generation also from renewable resources. So basically, we're not, and I'm not advocating shutting down any plants right now. What I am advocating is that we continue to build out our energy infrastructure so that we can meet the needs of people today, but using new technologies like wind and solar. When a coal plant has to be taken offline and dismantled, we replace that production with wind and solar. And we slowly phase in and move towards wind, solar, and other types of renewables as we go. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that advocate an unrealistic idea of actually shutting down plants. I don't think that that's really necessary. I know there's a lot of whole argument about the sacrificing and things like that, but I do believe that technology will continue to improve and to basically solve a lot of the problems that we have today. But if we start a plan right now that phases in new power and new types of generation slowly, but with an actual effort put forth, I think we can make the conversion a lot smoother and more comfortable. And through this utilization, cost of wind and solar and other renewables will continue to drop until they are competitive or even better than coal. Because as demand goes up, production capabilities kick in, people innovate, and they help to bring costs back down. And that's just the net of it. So when someone's arguing with you that it's too expensive to build it out, don't tell them that you're advocating killing these plants and trying to build out stuff after you shut down the plants. What liberals need to do is focus on the idea of phasing in, having an aggressive phasing in schedule that will bring this new power to all homes at a price we can all afford. Thank you. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Screams from the Center. Leave comments below on how I can improve. Please subscribe, like, and share this video. My blog is at screamsfromthecenter.wordpress.com, on Twitter at screamsftcenter, on Google and Facebook, Screams from the Center. Thank you.